Good evening. Welcome to another edition of the 411 Talk Zone radio show right here on YouTube. My name is Leon Jones, and what I'm going to talk about today is standardized testing. And I talked about, does education make you intelligent? Now, this was last week's video, so I'm going to piggyback off of last week's video. Now, again, intelligence is something that we all have, and you can expand your intelligence. Education is a tool. Shout out to my boy Reg, the bad guy. Reg, I know you drink some beer. You need to try this. This is Angry Orchard. Love it. Hard cider. When it's 0 degrees here in Indianapolis, it's great to drink. Shout out to Reg, the bad guy. Shout out to my boy Matt Cole. Shout out to my boy Nate. Know you're feeling better. Shout out to Angry Snowman. He's up in Fort Wayne, Indiana. So, I want to get into the standardized testing because it seems to me that get in college, you have a standardized test. To go to grad school, you have a standardized test. And basically, when something is standardized, it's got some type of uniformity, like the ACT or the SAT, the ACT, the GRE. But do these tests really measure your intelligence? And I can say it can. It just depends on how the questions are phrased. Bottom line is this. When you deal with any type of testing, you basically have to read the question and make sure that it is making sense. Sometimes they throw curveballs at you. I mean, you have some of the smartest people out there who fail standardized tests. Now, also, are you a good test taker? You have to ask those questions. Now, I want to share my screen, and I'm going to get into an article, and I will post it. And this is from one of my favorite sources, Psychology Today, and the link will be posted to this article under my description section of this video. Now, again, what is the point of standardized testing? Because some individuals believe that standardized testing can identify weaknesses and not strengths. Now, when we deal with standardized testing or standardized tests, it's often debated for how well they accomplish their goal of egalitarianism. Now, you're not going to have egalitarianism because you have some areas in the country, particularly if we look at everything from a political background, some of your blue cities like a Chicago and a Baltimore and a Philadelphia, a Cleveland, a Washington, D.C. and a Philadelphia, where in some areas the education system is poor and they're just putting teachers out there just to get a paycheck. And now a lot of these educators are under the union, the National Education Association. Now, the idea behind standardized tests is that they give everyone a chance regardless of their situation. You score well on a test, you prove your aptitude. Now, standardized tests are supposed to be a general measure of intelligence. And general intelligence should be situation independent. But still, standardized tests have been shown to correlate with socioeconomic status. Now, the issue, to say at least, is very complex, but there is an aspect of standardized testing that's often left out of the debate. Now, when we say socioeconomic status, there are some people who are well off and some who are not well off. But when we deal with standardized testing, if you look at the big picture of standardized testing, I can see where it makes some sense. But in reality, not everybody is taught the same way. You look in Baltimore, when you had a 0.13, yes, a 0.13 GPA. Now, a 1.0 or 1.00 is what we consider a D. Now, a 2.00 is the minimum in order to move on to, well, you can pass with a D, but you have to graduate with a C, which is 2.00. Now, what are standardized tests used for? Again, the SAT is used for college admissions. Now, you have people who pass the SAT who still shouldn't be in college. Now, here's the deal. Standardized tests are constructed to test students on what they should know. Take the SAT, the mainstay of college admissions. The mathematics section doesn't expect you to be on an accelerated course. But if you don't have any concepts tightly under your belt, the test will certainly identify them. Similarly, with the verbal section, it doesn't presuppose which text you've read, but it does ask you to read text under time constraints and without any previous familiarity with subject or author. Now, the SAT paints a clear line on the sidewalk and says, this is where we expect you to be. Now, let me show you something else. I have this book right here. Normally, I would present this information on my other channel, but this is the FE civil exam. Well, that's also a standardized test, and it measures what you should know. Now, that also depends on the last time you had the courses, because if you've been out of school for a long time, I know for the FE exam, for the CPA exam, you're going to forget some things. And if you go ahead and take this test, regardless of how intelligent you are, you might fail the test. Now, these tests are all under time constraints, and you may or may not be familiar with the subject or author. Now, the SAT, again, it paints a clear line on the sidewalk and says, this is where we expect you to be. And if you fall short of the line, they'll quantify by exactly how much. But what if you exceed the line? Very students get a perfect overall score. Very few. Notice very few students get a perfect overall score on the SAT. It used to be if you put your name on a thing, you get 200. But quite a few get perfect or near perfect scores in one of the sections. Often it's a trade-off in quantitative versus qualitative skills. Students may excel in math, but not reading or vice versa. Now, the SAT is constructed to figure out whether a student is prepared to begin college, but beyond an aptitude for math problems versus reading comprehension. They don't tell you what a student is prepared to do once he or she gets in college. Now, still, the best case scenario, a student doing very well on a test, more likely if the student is especially good at something. Now, the test won't capture it. You could take, for instance, almost anything that's not math, reading, or writing, but considered drama. Theater kids may have been considered weird in high school, but in retrospect, I hope we can all see that there's a significant kind of talent here. Now, most of the students are the kinds of things we wish desperately we could pull off as adults, commanding the attention of an audience, helping unlock the best of one's collaborators, and willingness to do something no matter what others might think of it. Obviously, standardized tests can't capture that sort of thing. Is there a slight bias with standardized tests? You think? It could be. Because the standardized test really doesn't talk about the application. What about somebody who's a carpenter, who goes to VOTEC, somebody who reads plans? Do you need a 630 or a 580? Yes, you need to know some math and some English. But even with the high scores on the SAT, you may be able to get in college based off the score they want, but that still doesn't make you intelligent. Now, the only thing that standardized tests can measure is whether a student falls short, whether or not a student falls short. Now, they're designed, here it is. They're designed to poke and prod until a soft spot is found. And once the weakness is exposed, the shortcoming is cataloged and the process continues until another is identified. So the best thing a standardized test can say about you is that you don't possess readily identifiable weaknesses. Now, standardized tests only measure the absence of weakness. They do not measure the presence of strength. This doesn't seem like the kind of education that we need to talk about or ought to be about. Again, this does not seem like the kind of education ought to be about. Talk about standardized testing, because a lot of your education is not geared toward the standardized test. Now, what education should do is take a student's natural gifts and encourage him or her to use them to the fullest potential. An educated citizen is one who brings her or his gifts to society's table, not one who has proved his or her ability to survive the battery with the least whimpering. Now, the most important part is not figuring out what students are bad at, but what they're good at. That's also the hard part as well. Now, the reason why standardized tests cannot measure strength is that they are standardized. You remember something about standardization. I'm going to give you an example. And I will talk about this on my other channel. It's when you have a project. Well, and I'll give you construction projects. Now, here in Indiana, NDOT has specifications for every project. These are statewide standards. However, every project doesn't measure to every standard. There are specific standards, known as project specific standards, that are used for that particular project. On that being said, one size does not fit all. So strengths aren't one size that fits all either. Now, Tolstoy wrote that happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Now, in case of families, the good is uniform and the bad is heterogeneous. For intelligence, it's the opposite. Weaknesses are all alike. That's why the SAT can measure them consistently and across the board. But each strength is strong in its own way. Now, the only test we've developed that's robust enough to identify the strengths is called life. And even life is important. It is imperfect. It's important. Life is important, but it's not perfect. So you have to have a lot of common sense if you're going to be in survival mode. But you need a little education to actually expand your intelligence on how to get through complex situations. Now, this is not, however, a definite argument against standardized tests. Now, there is one kind of strength they can measure and how well the student takes standardized tests. This shouldn't be the only kind of strength we're interested in, but it shouldn't be discarded either. The reason that students from disadvantaged backgrounds can benefit from tests like the SAT is that it gives them a rare opportunity to compete on the same field as more privileged students. If they win, we should take that seriously. Now, I'm just going to say this. It does happen. I know if you saw the movie, Morgan Freeman played it in it. Lean on Me. That happened to a high school in New Jersey. The students did pass the standardized test, and that school was in the hood. But if you really think about it, because so many areas, particularly in the urban areas, the education system sucks. So they're not going to do well on a standardized testing. So because they won't do now, doesn't mean that they can't compete. No. You know, one thing about learning, people learn differently. You have people out there who are well off, but they're not street smart. Now, when we deal with this test and we look at the privilege versus the non-privilege, you have to look at it through rose-colored glasses. This is where the wishy-washy, anemic or holistic evaluation process in college admission succeeds, because it allows for different kinds of students who are good at different things to be considered on the merit that puts them in the best light. Oh, it's not perfect, as shown by recent scandals, but it needs checks. But an overly standardized process will lead to an overly standardized demographic of students. Now, ultimately, the point of standardized tests isn't to create a legion of educated citizens who are good at them. It is to create a legion of educated citizens, some of whom are good at them. And that is agreeable. But does a standardized test, if you really think about it, does it really measure intelligence? You think about that for a moment. I don't think so. Because I'm going to put myself in the mix here. I'm not the greatest test taker, but it doesn't mean that I can't compete out here. Because you have people who are good test takers, but they can't do the job. Sometimes when you look at something on paper, some people know how to pick out the right answers. Most of these standardized tests are all multiple choice. So if you are a good test taker, and this is where you can come from a bad area, and if you know how to guess, if you know how to utilize a little bit of the concepts, you can go in and pass that test. But a lot of these standardized tests, here's one thing that they don't do. They don't really analyze learning styles. You see, we all learn differently. That's the big part. Now, when it comes to my intelligence, certainly I understand what's going on here in the streets. But getting into college, and you think about it too, there's another standardized test called the Armed Services Vocation Aptitude Battery Exam. If you're not familiar with that, that's known as the ASVAB. That's to get you into the military. And if you get the qualifying score, you'll be able to qualify for a number of enlisted positions that the military will offer you. However, if you're not good at testing and you get a low score, your options are not going to be available. Same with the GRE, the Graduate Requirement Examination. To get into grad school, some of them require you to take a GRE. Now, I'm throwing all these acronyms at you, but neither of these tests is answered in one important question that I have mentioned. Do these tests really make you intelligent? Now, my humble opinion is a standardized test does not make you intelligent. Yes, the article pointed out what you should know. You should know it, but do you really know it? You know, it's just like taking the FE exam or the accounting exam. Yet you should know the material, but if you have been out of school for a while, you're not going to pass that standardized test unless you do a lot of studying it or take prep classes. Now, the reason why I'm going over all this, because when it comes to testing in particular in education, I do not like the way the tests are prepared, because a lot of what you are looking at is all memory, all memory. Now, some remember better than others. Some know how to utilize testing strategy over others. Some have to study harder, but you can study all you want and sometimes not get the score that is required. And who comes up with the score? You have to ask yourself, were standardized tests biased? They could be. Because remember, we're all born with intelligence, but it's how we use it. Many of us should be able to do the obvious, but even the person who takes the SAT, the ACT, or any other standardized test, you have a number of them that can't do the obvious. So because they do well on the SAT, but they can't do the obvious in the real world, does that make them intelligent? No. Because when it comes to intelligence, your education is a tool. Now, your education is going to expand your intelligence because you're going to add more knowledge. But when you are studying something, you're studying something that you're interested in. Most of us, when we're in high school, you have to look at what they're teaching you, the curriculum as well. Used to be also, when I was in elementary school, middle school, and high school, we took standardized tests every odd year called the Iowa test and the California test. Just another test to see what you know. But other than that, it really didn't mean anything. Bottom line is this. When it comes to testing, testing doesn't really teach you how to utilize your hands. Because you have some people who can go out there and be musicians. Are they given a standardized test? Unless you majored in music, I guarantee there are a number of individuals, even who are science and doctors or medical majors and accountant and engineering majors. Can they go out and actually read a sheet of music? Do they actually know what a whole note is? A quarter note? Do they actually know what a chord is? No. Why? Because they haven't been trained in music. If I go and tell somebody to do the trapezoidal rule to give me an area under a curve, could you do it? No, not everybody can do it. Because first of all, they have to know what the area under a curve is. They have to know what rule to use. Now, because I've utilized the tool, I know what it is. But is that a standard test? No, that's based on what I took in school. See, what they're trying to do with all these standardized tests, they're trying to make everything a one size fits all. Now, let me go ahead and just go back in here and look at everything as I share my screen again. Okay, let me go back. Add a little bit, because there are a lot of people that really don't know what's going on out here, and I'm trying to teach them what's going on. But there was some information that I had back here that I'm going to skip to about standardized testing, and just bear with me. I just saw it. Here it is right here. All right. As I go here, are exams a good measure of intelligence? And then, what are standardized tests? Well, again, standardized exams follow a uniform format with all pupils presenting identical questions and answer choices. Now, these exams are usually more controlled conditions in an exam hall and scored consistently, comparing pupil performance and group achievements. Now, many examiners and professionals consider standardized exams a fair and objective method of assessing pupils because the standardized format reduces the potential for favoritism, bias, or subjective evaluations. And however, many are going to argue that these exams provide a limited measure of a student's education and intelligence, failing to capture essential aspects like creativity and innovation. Now, these skills are often undervalued forms of intelligence that can greatly benefit children as they grow and mature. Instead of solely focusing on cramming facts, exam boards, and other education bodies that should foster and include assessments where other forms of intelligence are tested to determine the student's final grade. Now, again, when we deal with standardized exams, there are pros and cons. Now, here are the pros of standardized examinations. They do provide a consistent benchmark for assessing student performance across schools and regions, enabling their comparisons and identifying areas of improvement. They also evaluate the effectiveness of educational policies and curriculums, enabling data-driven decision making to enhance the quality of education. Standardized exams can identify achievement gaps and disparities in educational outcomes, highlighting the need for targeted interventions and measures when it comes to students. It's a measure, but you have to understand too, we deal with targeted interventions. Or what about resources to support disadvantaged students? Again, they're trying to identify the achievement gaps and disparities, but there are disparities. Well, how's a standardized test going to help a disadvantaged student? Now, again, the standardized tests also measure academic attainment, facilitating university and employment opportunities based on a common assessment framework. Also, they promote accountability in the education system by holding schools, teachers, and students accountable for the performance, fostering a culture of continuous improvement. That could be true if it were used that way. But again, a lot of the teachers, they're under the NEA, the National Education Association, which is the teachers union. But now with every pro, you got cons. Well, for the con, the standardized exams can create a narrow focus on rote memorization and test taking skills, neglecting the development of critical thinking, creativity, and problem solving abilities. That's why I wanted to come back to this screen so you'll know. Now, they may generate undue stress and anxiety among students, leading to negative impacts on mental health and well being. They could fail to capture the full range of a student's abilities and potential, as they are limited to a specific format and content, overlooking individual strengths and diverse learning styles. Standardized testing can promote a teaching to the test mentality, which is going to narrow the curriculum, and it's going to sacrifice a more holistic and comprehensive education. Now, the emphasis on standardized exams can result in a high stakes environment that puts excessive pressure on students and may lead to a diminished love for learning, as the focus becomes solely on achieving high scores rather than fostering a genuine passion for knowledge. Well, again, when it comes to intelligence, so you'll know, there are various theories that propose different types of intelligence. One known framework is Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligence or intelligences, which basically they suggest that there are multiple independent forms of intelligence. Now, according to Gardner, there's what we call linguistic intelligence. That's the ability to use language effectively, such as writing, or they use writing and public speaking. Then you have logical mathematical intelligence. That's the capacity for logical reasoning and problem solving, and is often associated with mathematical thinking. Then you have spatial intelligence, which is the aptitude for perceiving and manipulating visual spatial information that is important in activities like navigation or art. Then you have bodily kinesthetic intelligence, skill and control in body movements such as sports, dance, or crafts. Music intelligence, sensitivity to rhythm, pitch, and sound, enabling musical abilities and appreciation. Then you have your interpersonal intelligence, proficiency in understanding and interacting with others, including empathy, social skills, and leadership. Then you have intrapersonal intelligence. That's when we get into self-awareness and introspective capabilities that involve understandings, one, understanding emotions, goals, and motivations. Then we have naturalistic intelligence, which it's a keen awareness and understanding of the natural world, including plants, animals, and ecosystems. Then we have existential intelligence, which is the capability to contemplate philosophical or existential questions about life, meaning, and, of course, existence. Now, it is also important to note that these are just examples, and different models may propose additional types or have variations in their categories. Now, intelligence is a complex and multifaceted concept, and there is ongoing debate and exploration within the field of psychology regarding its nature and diversity. Now, the key point is that standardized tests solely measure one facet. Notice, one facet of intelligence, and that's specifically memory, and it fails to assess other forms of intelligence. However, Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences, it's basically faced criticism for its broad definition and lack of empirical support, with some arguing that the parts of intelligence that he proposes are better understood as talents or personality traits. Yet the theory remains popular among educators who embrace the concepts and strive to incorporate multiple intelligence or intelligences to their teaching approaches, benefiting students in diverse ways. Now, again, I will say, there, you have an essay checklist. You have tests by essays. The main import, the point, the evidence, the explanation. Now, this is if you're getting into an essay, but as you have just seen it, I broke it down to you. Just as I said earlier, a lot of these tests measure memory. Now, some of those intelligence that I brought you did sound like personality traits, but overall, when it comes to testing, we all learn differently. Some can use their hands, some can memorize, some can speak. But the main point I want to get to you about standardized testing, it only tests you on one type of intelligence, and that's memorization. Now, if you want to know my opinion, you can be good one day on a standardized test and be poor on another day. That's just like the NFL playoffs, one and done. In order to win the NFL playoffs, you got to be the best team that day. Well, when it comes to testing, you got to be the best that day. Because generally, when you take tests in school, particularly if you go to high school, college, where you have to put in years till you get a diploma, are you going to remember, and I'm going to go into high school, are you going to remember in 12th grade what you knew in 9th grade? No. Why? It's not that you're stupid / ignorant, stupid or ignorant. It means that what you took in 9th grade no longer applies to what you're taking in 12th grade. That's what these educators don't look at. Now, in college, they're telling you all these courses build off of each other. That is true, but when you look at everything, you go by importance. Yeah, you may have a prereq course to this next course. You may take some of the concepts from the other course, but do you need that whole course? Not necessarily. But it's just like this. It's a standardized test here. A lot of it is memorization. It is. And the reason why these standardized tests, they give everybody the same test, but everybody's not going to perform the same way. Now, they call that egalitarianism, because we're all given the same opportunity. But leading up to that test, everybody isn't the same. Because somebody who comes from a poor background may not have any of the concepts on the test. That's what you have to look at when we deal with standardized testing. Where are we going with it? What does it prove? What kind of data are you trying to get? Are you trying to look at it to see if the teachers are teaching school properly? I don't know. But what I do know is when it comes to intelligence, do not rely on a standardized test. Why? because each and every one of us has a different learning style. And that's my commentary for this edition of the 411 Talk Zone radio show right here on YouTube. If you like what I just presented, comment, share, and subscribe. And if you're looking for some STEM, and I'm going to get into the fundamentals of engineering examination on tomorrow's show on the QCIS channel. So on that channel, you get a daily dose of science, technology, engineering, and math. That's my second channel. Now, here's where you need to find me. You want to look at all my content. Comes to the 411 Talk Zone radio show. This information that I'm doing tonight is going to be posted on YouTube, Rumble, X, formerly Twitter, and of course, Truth Social. And for the QCIS channel, which that content is going to be also, it's going to be posted on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, and of course, LinkedIn. And once again, comes to standardized testing, always rely on it. Because it's not going to make you or break you. Why? Number one, it doesn't prove intelligence. Number two, might luck up and pass it next time. Because you got to look at testing styles as well. So if you didn't pass a standardized test, that's okay. You're no smarter and you're no dumber than the person who did. And the person who passed it is no smarter or no dumber either. It's just a performance measure. That's all it is. And in the end, I'm going to say this. Be blessed for what you have. Don't worry about what you don't have. Always know that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. And if it doesn't apply, let it fly. But if the shoe fits, wear it. If you don't like the shoe, change it. And once again, thank you for listening to this edition of the 411 Talk Zone radio show right here on YouTube. Till next time, my name is Leon Jones. I want you all to have a wonderful and gracious evening. God bless you. I'm out.